This is NEAF Talks.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. First and foremost, thank you all for being here at NEAF this year. It's been a tremendous day. The speakers have been outstanding. Our keynote speaker today will certainly not disappoint us. He is a Naval Academy graduate, a Marine Corps pilot and test pilot. He was an astronaut on 4 shuttle missions. STS-88 to Alpha 2A was the first assembly mission of the International Space Station. He has recently retired as the Associate Administrator at NASA. Please welcome to NEAF and his talk, the ISS from First Assembly Mission to Commercial Low Earth Destination. Please welcome Bob Cabana to NEAF.
Thanks, Jay.
Thank you.
For the younger folks in the audience here, I'm going to digress just a little bit at the beginning. And rather than talk about Space Station, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my journey. What motivates you? You know, where's your passion? What really interests you? You know, when I was a young boy, my mom and I took a train trip from Minneapolis to Baltimore to see her sister. And while we were there, we went to Washington, D.C. And even though I was only 5 years old, I remember going up the steps of the Capitol and walking into the rotunda, going to the top of the Washington Monument, going to Mount Vernon and seeing where George Washington lived. All that stuff I can remember, that big statue of Lincoln. But I remember going in the Smithsonian, and this was before the Air and Space Museum, and seeing the Wright Flyer and the Spirit of St. Louis hanging from the ceiling. And I wanted to fly. Now, I grew up in Minneapolis, and I kind of had the best of both worlds because I went to one of the best public school systems in the state, but I spent my summers working on my grandparents' farm, milking cows and mowing alfalfa. And I always tell folks, you know, flying in space, it's a lot like mowing an 80-acre field on a tractor. You're going around in circles all day. You're just going faster. But I learned a lot on the farm. But on the way up to the farm, we drove through Little Falls, Minnesota, and that was the hometown of Charles Lindbergh, one of my heroes. Flew across the Atlantic solo in 1927. And seeing the Wright Flyer and the Spirit of St. Louis, knowing about Lindbergh's history, I read all the books I could about the pilots and aces of World War II in Korea and the test pilots in the 50s and 60s, and that was where my passion was. That's what I wanted to do. Well, I never dreamed I could be an astronaut. When Alan Shepard flew America's first flight into space in May of 1961, you know, I was 12 years old, watching it in school on a black and white TV set. And I held astronauts in such high esteem, I didn't think that was something that I could actually do. When Apollo 11 launched to the moon, I was a young midshipman at the Naval Academy. I saw it from there. But the next year, the Physics Honor Society took a field trip to the Kennedy Space Center, and I got to see Apollo 13 launch. And I got to be in the vehicle assembly building seeing Saturn V rockets stacked up for Apollos 14 and 15. But I said, Jim Lovell, commander of the mission, Naval Academy graduate, naval aviator, naval test pilot, astronaut. You know, maybe I could do that. But there's a lot of steps in between. I got my first flight in a jet as a midshipman in an F-4 with a Navy lieutenant commander. I was in the back seat, and his only goal was to make me sick. And he did. I said, this is so much fun. I really want to do this. I earned my wings as a naval aviator, but I didn't get them on the first try. When I graduated from the Naval Academy, I chose a commission in the Marine Corps. I got down to Pensacola, and I flunked my eye test. And I said, oh my gosh, you know, this is the end. This is all I've ever wanted to do. And I said, do I qualify to be a naval flight officer? And they said, yep, you're good enough for that. And if you've seen Top Gun, the guy in the back seat, Goose, he was a naval flight officer. I was an A6 bombardier navigator, earned my wings. But every year I passed my physical with 20/20 vision. I finally convinced them to let me go back to pilot training and earn my wings as a naval aviator and flew A6s in the Marine Corps. Now, The moral of that whole story is I didn't get into pilot training on the first try. I didn't get into test pilot school on the first try. And I didn't get, and when I was in test pilot school, we flew the first shuttle mission. John Young and Bob Griffin, gutsiest test flight ever flown. And I was at Edwards Air Force Base when those guys were flying, doing my final graduation exercise for Navy test pilot school. I got to fly the F-104. I got 4 flights in it, and I had to define all the handling qualities and the performance characteristics of it. So I graduated from test pilot school, and then John Young and Dan Brandenstein, another astronaut, came to the Naval Air Test Center in they took the first group of shuttle astronauts in 78, the next group in 1980. In 1984, they took another group, and this is the first time I was qualified, and I applied. And I got down to Houston, I said, this is awesome, this is what I want to do, and I didn't get selected, and I was really crushed. But they said, we're going to take some more next year, Bob, and we'd like you to try again. And I was fortunate to get in the 1985 class, the 11th group of astronauts picked. So the moral of that story is, how do you get to be an astronaut? First off, persistence. But it's setting a goal for yourself and then working toward it. And when you achieve that goal, set a new one and move on. You can get into pilot training, test pilot school, or the astronaut program on the first try. The other part of it is, remember what I said about your passion? If you follow your passion and you do something that you really enjoy, then studying's not hard in school and work's not work. I've hardly worked a day in my life because I've been doing something that I am passionate about, America's space program and flying, and it's just been absolutely awesome. So I had the privilege of flying on 4 space shuttle missions, twice as pilot and twice as commander, and I want to talk about that last one. Before I talk about the space station, though, I want to talk what made space station possible, and that was the Shuttle-Mir program. We were building the space station with the Russians, and we needed to learn how to operate with them. Now, obviously, back in 1975, Tom Stafford, the commander of Apollo-Soyuz test project with Deke Slayton and Vance Brand, docked with a Soyuz capsule in space. That was our first interaction with them in a peaceful manner. And it set a standard. And Alexei Leonov and Lieutenant General Tom Stafford were friends for life. When Alexei passed away a couple of years ago, Tom Stafford went to his funeral and gave a eulogy in Russian at his state funeral in Moscow. Tom Stafford recently passed away here about a month ago now, and it's an end of an era. He was truly a great man and a great test pilot. But we did the Shuttle-Mir program with the Russians, and we flew 7 astronauts up to the Mir space station. They trained in Russia, and we worked together. We learned how to operate and work with them. Actually, when you look at the Mir space station, the 2 modules that were added during the time that we were flying the Shuttle-Mir program, the Spectre module and the Perota module, we helped pay for them as a contribution to allow us to fly and do science on their space station and learn how to operate with them. Norm Thagard, on the lower left, was the first U.S. astronaut to fly up to Mir, and he launched on a Soyuz spacecraft and came home on the space shuttle. And that was STS-71 when he came home. But we learned how to work well with the Russians during that time frame. Now, the space station, back when I was chief of the astronaut office, it was really hard to get folks to want to train to be on a space station mission, train to fly on a Shuttle-Mir mission, because we were flying 7 to 9 shuttle flights a year, 5 to 7 astronauts up there on a regular basis. And to fly on Mir, you had to go to Russia. You ended up training in Russia for a year. You had to learn how to speak Russian. And the same with the space station program. At the end of my tenure as chief of the astronaut office, I had to assign the first 3 crews for the International Space Station. And those guys, they really had it hard. We've learned how to work together much better and how to train together better now. But it was a lot of time in Russia, away from their families, learning how to do things the Russian way, to learn the Russian systems as well as the American systems. The first module to launch to the space station was the Russian FGB, Functional Cargo Block, and its name is Zarya, and Zarya means sunrise in Russian. It launched November 20th on a Proton rocket from Kazakhstan. Now, I was the commander of the mission for the first space station assembly mission, STS-88. Now, this was 1AR. It was the first space station mission, and it's AR because American/Russian. The Russians built the module, but the U.S. paid for it in order to get it up there and have power and control for the initial modules of the space station. This module, along with the service module, and I'll talk about more of that later, I actually saw them on trips to Russia prior to us totally getting involved with the Russians in the plant at Khrushchev, the basic modules. And they were actually built, the service module especially, was built for the Mir 2, the second Mir space station, and it ended up going to the International Space Station. So being assigned to command this first mission, we weren't going to have a mission unless the FGB launched successfully. And I had the whole crew over to my house in Houston, and we watched on TV as the Proton rocket successfully delivered Zarya into orbit, and we knew we got a mission. 2 weeks later, we're going to be launching. So I launched on ISS 2A, the second flight American module going up, and it was STS-88. And this is me at CEIT, Crew Equipment Interface Test down at the Cape, and I put it on here just so you can get some idea of the size of the node with the pressurized mating adapter in the payload bay, and you can see me standing there looking over at it, and a more of a back-away view of the module in the payload bay. That's me in the middle of the picture on the left in a bunny suit. So we were supposed to launch on the 3rd of December, and we got out to the launch pad, and things just weren't going right. The weather wasn't great. Nothing was really all that good. And we went ahead, counted down, and we had a problem starting one of the APUs, the auxiliary power units that provide the hydraulic power for the system that gimbals the engines and controls the flight controls. And we counted down to 18 seconds and didn't go. And so we went back to crew quarters. And the next day, the next day, this picture was on the front page of the Orlando Sentinel. And I got to tell you a little story about this picture. This is the morning before we launched that night on the 4th of December. And Red Huber took this picture and gave me a signed copy of it. But my daughter and I are real Wizard of Oz aficionados. And before I went into quarantine, they had just released The Wizard of Oz in fully restored, great color, and we went to see it together. And the wake-up music, the first day that we were on orbit, the second day after the first night on orbit, was Judy Garland singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow. And my daughter had chosen it, and it was on the, it really got me. I had tears coming down my eyes when I heard it. And I always tell folks, somewhere over the rainbow, dreams come true, because we launched, and it was absolutely a dream flight from start to finish. It went so smooth. That next night, the countdown was just one of the smoothest launch counts I've ever been through. This is us on the way out to the vehicle. That's Rick Sturko on the left. He was my pilot. It was his first flight, Marine Corps aviator test pilot. Nancy Curry in the middle. PhD in industrial engineering, was an Army helicopter pilot also before coming to NASA. Behind Nancy is Jerry Ross, great EVA guy, Air Force. Behind me is Jim Newman, PhD physicist. And behind Rick, that's Sergei Krikalev. I go back to the Shuttle-Mir program. When we were learning how to work with the Russians, Sergei actually flew on a space shuttle mission with Charlie Bolden, STS-60. And then Vladimir Titov, another Russian cosmonaut, flew with Jim Weatherby on STS-63. and they did the first rendezvous with Mir space station, but didn't dock with it. And then STS-71, commanded by Hoot Gibson, actually did the first docking with Mir and brought Norm home and brought Shannon Lucid up to the Mir space station. So that was us heading out for that perfect launch, and it couldn't have gone better. We got up on orbit, night launch. If you've never seen a night launch out of KSC, especially a shuttle, or I was there for the Artemis 1 launch, absolutely amazing. It just turns nighttime into daylight. It is so fantastic. The first thing we had to do was get the Unity node out of the payload bay and attach it to the orbiter docking station. And that was Nancy's task. And she had about an inch of clearance on either side in the payload bay, lifting that 25,000-pound mass out of the payload bay. And it was like watching grass grow. I didn't believe you could move the arm that slow, but she did an outstanding job, positioned it over the orbiter docking station, and then I fired the thrusters to bring the two pieces together. Interesting story on the orbiter docking station. That was actually built by the Russians also, and if you ever see inside the mock-ups or inside the space shuttle, on the aft flight deck, there's one panel that's different from all the others. You can tell that it was built by the Russians and not the US. The designer of it was Seremetnikov, and he designed the Apollo-Soyuz spacecraft docking adapter. And it's essentially a modification of that adapter that we bought from the Russians that we used for both the Shuttle-Mir program and the International Space Station program. Once we had Unity firmly attached, the next day we had to rendezvous with the FGB. And that's a crew effort. And rendezvous is something, Jim Newman's not in this picture. I'll talk about Jim in a little bit. Jim got selected to be an astronaut. I think it was on his fifth try or something. Very persistent PhD physicist, really smart. He used to train astronauts in rendezvous and proximity operations. He wrote a program that we used on orbit called RPOP, Rendezvous Proximity Operations Program. It ran on an IBM 760XD laptop, and we plugged into the orbiter PCMMU to get the data, and it would predict where you were going and show you your rendezvous profile. A great tool. So throughout the rendezvous, you can fly the orbiter from either the commander seat or the aft flight station when you're on orbit. Once we did the big burns and we were in the final phases, I was flying from the aft cockpit. The translational hand controller is on the left and the rotational on the right. Rotational moves this way, and this way, and it controls pitch, roll, and yaw. And then the translational controller goes in, out, left, right, up, down, and it translates the orbiter forward and back, side to side, up and down. It's really hard to fly 6 degrees of freedom at once, so we program the autopilot to control the attitude, and then all we have to worry about are the translations. So throughout the rendezvous, I'm using the KU band antenna to get range and range rates. Jerry Ross has got a handheld laser pinging on the module, getting range and range rate. I've got the orbiter systems telling me where we are. And I got Jim Newman in my ear telling me what he thinks, because he was an expert in rendezvous and proximity operations. And I'm using my onboard Coleman filter here to do what I think is right. Well, we flew that FGB down into the payload bay. That's looking out the overhead window at the FGB. And I had a camera on the center line looking up at it, and I had a camera on the end of the arm looking across from it. Now, all I had were two little, about 7-inch diameter TV monitors where I could see what the arm camera was looking at and what the center line camera was looking at. And I flew that 45,000-pound mass down in the payload bay, and I had it 3 feet from the end of the arm, ready to grab. We could not grab it until we got over a Russian ground site, because we had to make sure that it was in free drift, that it didn't have its control system on, because you wouldn't want to grab it with the arm and have it fight the arm and break it. Well, perfectly stable, 3 feet away. While we're waiting, remember I said the autopilot's holding attitude control. Well, the orbiter drifts, right? And it hit a dead band, all right? So if it hits the dead band, it fires the jets to center it up in pitch, roll, and yaw. It didn't get a pure pitch, roll, or yaw. You get roll, yaw coupling, and the bottom line is it turns into a translation. And all of a sudden, this 45,000-pound mass is moving toward the arm and toward the payload bay. It's going to hit us. It's only 3 feet away. And I started firing the thrusters to back away from it. It's still coming. And the autopilot, you can program it depending on what you're doing. And there's an A autopilot mode and a B autopilot mode. And I was in the B mode for very fine, precise control, and I had enough sense to select the A mode, get a little more control power, back away from it, and then we moved back in and got all stable again. Well, when it was over, Jim, who had been providing me all this advice throughout the whole rendezvous, it was just dead silence in the cockpit. And I said, Pluto, that was his nickname, dog name. I said, Pluto, how come you didn't provide me any advice then? He said, well, I know when to keep my mouth shut. But fortunately, I knew what to do, did the right thing, and I'm here to talk about it now. And the space station's looking really good. So once we got a hold of it with the arm, we lifted it up over the other pressurized mating adapter, and again, fired the thrusters to bring the two pieces together, used the docking adapter, and locked them in. And that's what it looked out overhead window, and that's what the IMAX camera saw when we did that. And that was the beginning of the space station. All right? Then we did 3 spacewalks to hook up all the power and data connectors. And if you can't tell, it's kind of shady. You got to see it up closer. But that was Jerry Ross took a picture. That's me looking out the window on the left, and Rick Sturko looking out the window on the right. Commanders and pilots don't get to do spacewalks or work the robotic arm normally. But we had a lot to do on our mission, and I got trained as the backup arm operator. I broke into the Mission Specialist Union and got checked out. So on the third EVA, I was flying Jerry Ross around on the end of the arm. Another story. So we're in the simulator, and you've got slow rates and fast rates on the arm. And I flip it up to the fast rate, and I'm just zipping them around. It's a simulator. And Nancy Curry says, "You're not going to do that on orbit, are you?" And I said, "Why? Why not?" But I didn't. I was very careful because you don't want to bang into anything or whatever. But that was kind of fun. So we got the 3 spacewalks done, and then we got to go in the space station. So here's it's kind of a trick question. Who was the first person to enter the International Space Station? You don't have to answer. The truth is there was no first person. We went through a series of hatches to go from the orbiter all the way to the end of the functional cargo block. And every hatch that we went through, when it came time to open the first hatch, I said, "Sergey, get up here." And I pulled him up alongside me. And the media had asked who's going to be the first one in. I didn't tell anybody. I left it as a surprise. I didn't even tell the crew. But when it came time to enter, I believe that if we're going to enter an International Space Station, we need to enter as an international crew. And so if you look at any of the video or the pictures, Sergey and I go through all the hatches side by side. Sergey's a good friend. Right now, Sergey is head of the human spaceflight program for the Russian Space Agency. And I recently, even though I retired the end of last year, the administrator asked me to replace General Stafford as chair of the ISS Advisory Committee. And Sergey is my counterpart on that committee, working to keep the space station safe. That's us inside Unity node, and Nancy and Sergey inside the FGB. We spent a lot of time removing panels and bolts that were put into the modules to give it more structural integrity to withstand the launch loads and that were not needed once on orbit. And Sergey was we were trying to get it ready for that first crew to actually go up and live on the space station. We were in the space station for just 2 days and 1 night. And on orbit, because the sun rises and sets every 45 minutes in 90-minute orbit, you can't get up and go to sleep and expect 45 minutes of sleep. So you set your day up like you would on Earth. And if you could imagine that we're going to get up at 7 a.m. and go to bed at 11 o'clock at night to get our 8 hours of sleep. So it's time for me to go to bed. And I was on the flight deck cleaning up some stuff. And I said, I think I'll just dip into the space station and be in it a little bit before I call it a night. And I go down on the mid-deck, and I had a couple of folks on the crew that really needed all their sleep. And then I had a couple of night owls. But the rule was, if you were, during sleep time, if you're down on the middeck, you had to be totally silent and quiet, not wake anybody up. And I'd go through where my sleeping compartment was, or bag, and into the airlock, and I turn up, and when I get into the space station, who would I see? Jim Newman and Sergei Krikalev. And we just kept working and talking about what is this cornerstone that we're laying? What does it mean? And what does it hold for the future? And it was just absolutely awesome. About 4 o'clock in the morning, I said, guys, this is it. We're done. We got to get a couple hours of sleep. We got a really busy day the next day, and we called it a night. But that was really special. I also got to make the first logbook entry in the International Space Station. And there's a difference between what's on the left and the right. If you notice, there's a picture of us on the right. Rick Sturko, who was my pilot on that first mission, later went up to command space station mission, and he took that picture of our crew up and taped it into the log next to the logbook entry. Now, I'm going to turn around with my back to you because I don't have this memorized. I'm going to read this to you because it's probably kind of hard to read. But it's December 10th, 1998, activation of the International Space Station by the crew of the Space Shuttle Endeavour, STS-88, ISS-2A. From small beginnings, great things come. Today, we ingressed for the first time the Unity and modules. May the spirit of international cooperation and space exploration continue to grow as the space station grows, taking us on to the moon, Mars, and beyond. The crew of Endeavour, and we all signed it. And I believe the space station program has just been an absolutely marvelous example of international cooperation. We've got the United States, Canada, Japan, Russia, and the European Space Agency and all its partners working together as one, 250 miles above us. It was time to undock, again out the overhead window, and that's what the space station looked like when I left it in December of 1998. Pretty small and humble, but like I said, from small beginnings, great things come. This summed up the whole mission. That was, after we got out of the orbiter, I just was looking up at Endeavour, and Nancy was next to me, and I just gave her a big hug, and it was just the feeling of joy and accomplishment that we had after that mission. It just really felt great. That picture kind of summed it up. The next module to go up, it took a while. We flew a couple of service missions up to the ISS, brought some cargo and some other things up between my flight and this flight. But this was in July of 2000, and this is launching Zvezda, means star in Russian, and again, launching on a Proton rocket. And this is what allowed crews to actually come and live on the International Space Station. And the first crew to go up to the space station was Yuri Gudzinko, was the Soyuz commander. The next one up is Bill Shepard. He was the ISS commander. Bill was a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy. I actually flew my first space flight with Bill. It was his second on STS-41. And you can see Sergei Krikalev, the highest one up behind Bill Shepard. And you notice how foggy it is there? I was in Moscow and working in the International Space Station program as a manager for international operations. And we had I'd flown over to Moscow, and we were flying down to Baikonur for the launch. And the weather was terrible. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited, and finally they launched. We launched on this Russian plane to Baikonur. And we're coming down to land, and it's cloudy out the windows. I can't see anything. And the power comes back, and I'm waiting for the wheels to touch down. And all of a sudden, the power comes back up, and we're going back up, and I look out, and all I see is dirt underneath the airplane. And we go around, and the next time we landed on a runway. And it was just, we got there just right before the launch, and you could hardly even see the launch. It went up for like 100 feet and was gone, and all you saw was kind of this glow in the clouds. But Bill and the gang got up there safely and went in and actually began living and working on the International Space Station. So now, I don't know, I don't see that many young folks in the office, but in the audience, but anybody that is 23 years old or younger in the world has never known a time that there weren't humans living and working together in space. This is what the space station looks like today. Absolutely amazing. It's the size of a football field. And it is just, you've got the European laboratory, Columbus, you've got the Japanese laboratory, Kibo, which means hope, 2 U.S. nodes, the cupola, looking out the windows of the cupola. I asked one of the astronauts that was up there, I said, how is that? And they said, it's better than an EVA. In an EVA, you're in the suit, and you're kind of, you can go up in your shirt sleeves and just sit up there and watch the Earth go by. And I always tell folks, that's the most amazing thing about being in space. It's awesome what we get to do up there, the science, the research that we're doing. But, for me, when I was chief of the astronaut office, I always used to tell first-time flyers, when you get up there, stick your nose up to the window and make a memory. Do not take a picture, okay? And time on orbit is so precious, it's so expensive. I would love to have flown a long-duration flight. My longest flight was only 16 days, 15 and a half. You can forget where you are and what a unique opportunity and how special it is. And if you take a picture, it doesn't do it justice. You guys are, if you've ever been out and seen the Grand Canyon, it's majestic, it's amazing. And you come home and look at the picture and say, no, I was better than that. I remember my first flight, after I got back, the IMAX movie, The Blue Planet, had just opened at the Air and Space Museum. And I went to see it. And I'm looking at it, and I thought, yeah, that's it. That's the curvature. No, it looks better than that. No film, no picture can do it justice. The black is just the blackest black you can imagine. And that thin little hazy line that's our atmosphere, it's all that's protecting us from that harsh void of space. It's just, I spent every spare minute I could just watching the Earth go by. It's a very special place, and we need to take care of it. But we're doing great research on the International Space Station. That's Selezon Sharapov. That's what the node looks like now, sort of. It's even more crowded than that. Just by way of reference, Marine, see how nice and neat and clean it is when I left it? Again, a little busy in there, but it's kind of the hub of activity. The resistive exercise device is in there. The crew gathers in there to eat. It's kind of, Node 1 is the hub of the International Space Station. This is Don Pettit inside the U.S. lab. Don, really interesting, Don's going to be 69 years old, and he's going to be going on the next Soyuz to the International Space Station. He's going back up for another long-duration flight. Don is on the cycle ergometer here doing a medical test in the lab. The astronauts on orbit have mandatory exercise 2 hours a day. The equipment that they have is the cycle ergometer for aerobic exercise. They have a treadmill. You wear a bungee cord that holds you down on it so that you can run on it. And they have a resistive exercise device. And it looks like a universal gym. And you can do any weightlifting that you can do on Earth, you can do on the resistive exercise device. So it's all laid out for them to keep them healthy. One of the things that we've found is that bone loss. Drugs help, but they don't do it. Your body needs exercise. You need to run on the treadmill. I told one of my flight docs, I bragged. I said, I always take the stairs up, but I take the elevator down because it's hard on my knees. And he said, no, you got to take the stairs down too. Your bones need that jarring in order to keep them strong. And working with muscles, working with weights, the strong muscles also help keep your bones strong. But we've learned so much on the International Space Station about how to live and work and survive in space. And just from a medical point of view, but we still have a lot to learn for these long-duration missions to Mars. Again, pictures don't do it justice. It's absolutely awesome. Now, as you guys know, there's stars on the sunlit side of the Earth too, but the sun is so darn bright, your irises shrink down and you don't see them. All you see is that black void, and it truly is the blackest black that you can possibly imagine. And it's just, the space station is just, it's truly an amazing accomplishment. But I think one of the best things about it is how we all work together. And I will tell you, in spite of all the troubles down here on Earth and all the conflict and everything that's going on, we're still working together as a team on the International Space Station. When the shuttle retired, we had to rely on our Russian partners to get our crews to the International Space Station. And of course, that means a Soyuz rocket out of Baikonur and a capsule landing in the steppes of Kazakhstan. And it's a little different than landing on the shuttle. I kind of like my landing a lot better. But I talked to one of my Russian friends one time on one of the earlier Soyuz missions, and he said, yeah, they told me it was a soft landing, and when they landed, the crystal popped off his watch. But again, our partnership was really important. That's Joe Acaba and Anne McLean. Anne McLean was on increment 58 and 59 on the International Space Station. That's her coming home, colonel in the Air Force. This is the crew that's on orbit right now, Expedition 71. I find that hard to believe, that we've had 71 expeditions to the International Space Station. Tracy Caldwell, and this is the crew that just launched on the Crew Dragon up to the ISS. Now, if you notice, we've got Tracy flying on a Soyuz, and we have a Russian that's flying on the Crew Dragon. And there's a reason for that. We want to have that dissimilar redundancy. If there were a reason that the Soyuz had to come home in an emergency, or one of the Soyuz crew members had an emergency that they absolutely had to come home, that would just, if we just flew on our own vehicles, that would leave all American or European, Japanese, Canadian astronauts on the space station and no Russians responsible for the Russian systems. And vice versa. If we were to leave, we wouldn't have anyone totally trained in understanding our systems on the US segment. So we want that interoperability between our crews. So it's very important that we continue to maintain that. The space station is going to be in space until 2030. We've extended it to 2030. There's still some work to do in order to certify that. But then it's going to be time to bring it home. And we're going to transition to the future. The space station, you know, it's going to be a real challenge getting this thing down. And we've gone out for getting proposals on what we can do to have some sort of tug or whatever to safely deorbit it. It's something that we should have worked on a long time ago, but now we're getting serious about it because it's a huge mass to come down, and we don't want it to come down uncontrolled like Skylab did, where pieces of it fell on Australia. It's going to be a controlled reentry into the Pacific Ocean where there's nothing, so that we don't do damage to anyone down here on Earth when it's time to come home. And it's kind of sad to think that all that hard work and effort is not going to stay on orbit. But all systems eventually, even though we've been upgrading everything, we've upgraded the solar arrays, we've upgraded batteries, we continue to upgrade it and keep it going. We've got a ton of spare parts that we've replaced, valves and so on. But there are systems that are going to reach the end of their life where it will not be safe. The other part of this is it's very expensive to maintain. And we want to create a commercial economy in low Earth orbit so we can focus on that really hard job of exploring beyond our home planet, establishing a presence beyond planet Earth in our solar system, and someday beyond. But the space station, we have learned so much. You know, this is 25 years of science on ISS. And when you look at all that we've been able to accomplish, you know, over 100 different nations doing science, 3,700 different investigations, 250 research facilities on the space station, racks that have been changed in and out, small and big, 5,000 researchers, 4,000 publications, publications in scientific journals. It has been absolutely amazing, the amount of science. For me personally, I think one of the biggest benefits of the space station is the engineering test bed that it is in proving the systems that we need to be able to explore as we go on to Mars. If I look at areas of research, you know, biology and biotech, if we're going to live beyond our home planet, and one of the things that is a huge challenge is the radiation environment once we get out of the Earth's magnetosphere that protects us from all the radiation in space. We have to figure this out. It impacts This is why I need to go to Mars, okay? I'm old enough that if I get cancer, it doesn't matter. I'm ready. But that's a challenge, understanding how that works. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Earth and space science, we're constantly studying the Earth. We're constantly studying space. The alpha magnetic spectrometer that's on the space station. We do human research, physical sciences. But again, that technology development, when I look at the systems on the space station, you heard some about the challenges with Orion and the systems in the previous talk. You know, yes, the carbon dioxide removal system, excellent, not having to use Lyle canisters. One of the huge challenges is having, I would love to have a 100% efficient closed-loop environmental control system. We're about 98% efficient right now. So we're constantly supplying nitrogen, oxygen, and water to the International Space Station. Well, what does that mean for trips to Mars? You know, right now, a trip to Mars, you're talking a year and a half to 2 years. It's like 8 to 9 months to get there, another 8 to 9 months on Mars, and then another 8 to 9 months after the planets align to get home. How do you maintain human life during all that time? And before you even go to Mars, studies I've seen say you have to pre-stage 18 metric tons of supplies and equipment on Mars in order to keep that crew alive. 18 metric tons. The Mars rover, that was 1 metric ton, and look what it took to get that on Mars. So a huge challenge in front of us as we go on to Mars. As mentioned, that's one of the purposes of the Artemis program. Learn how to operate for an extended period of time in that kind of environment away from planet Earth. Doing it on the lunar surface, besides all that we're going to learn about the moon as we go on. I talked about biology. These are protein crystals. These are actually human insulin crystals. And why do we grow protein crystals in space? The ones that you see on the left were grown in 1G. The ones that you see on the right were grown in microgravity. Okay? They grow much larger with much better definition. So we're not always making the medicines in space, but we're getting these protein crystals that then come back to Earth, and we can better understand their structure so that if it's a virus or a disease or something, we can actually engineer a medicine that works with that, whatever it is, you know, that we're working with, that we've grown the protein crystal for. Merck has actually, you know, the cancer drug Keytruda. Their research on the International Space Station, growing protein crystals for one of the key ingredients to Keytruda, that was research that was enabled because of the International Space Station, cancer cure. So going on into the future, what is the future? I'm really proud of what we accomplished at the Kennedy Space Center after the end of the Space Shuttle program. We have truly turned it into a multi-use spaceport for both government and commercial operations. Right this year, so far, SpaceX has had 40 launches out of the Cape. They're going to hit 100 this year between all the launches of the different providers. So what are we doing? We're developing commercial crew to get our crews to the International Space Station without the Space Shuttle. In some cases, it took a little longer than other, but it was not, it's still a government contract, all right? It was a firm fixed price contract where the company put in money and the government put in money. And we helped develop it over time using Space Act agreements until we got to the point where we could have a firm fixed price contract to develop these vehicles. The Crew Dragon Demo 2 flew its first flight in May of 2020 to the International Space Station. We just launched the 8th crew to the International Space Station on the Crew Dragon. And that's Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley flying that test flight. It's really interesting. If you look at the control panel there, you can't see it, but under Bob's hand a little more over there, there are actually some switches. We mandated that there were a couple of switches in there for some really key things that had to happen, but it's a touch screen. When you rendezvous manually, first off, everything is done automated. But when you rendezvous manually, you're tapping on the screen. Instead of taking the translational hand controller up and down and left and right, you're, up, down, left, right, increase, decrease speed, just tapping it. It's kind of cool. But it's just like being inside a Tesla. This is Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore, Butch and Sonny on that side, and they are getting ready to fly the crewed test flight of the Boeing CST-100 Starliner. And that launches on an Atlas V, and as you heard, it's scheduled for 6 May right now, if everything stays on track. The flight readiness review for NASA is going to be the end of next week, and that'll make the final decision on the launch date. They've been training for a really long time. If you look inside the Boeing capsule, it's a little different than the Crew Dragon, but equally capable. So looking for a very successful test flight there. We want to ensure that we have dissimilar redundancy so that, like when the Space Shuttle left, we had to rely on the Russians. Well, if the Russians have a problem, we still got the Crew Dragon. What if the Crew Dragon had a problem? We want a way to ensure access to space for our astronauts, and that's why we have both Boeing and SpaceX. So commercial LEO destinations. We want to get the space station down and enable this commercial environment in low Earth orbit. This is what I thought commercial LEO destinations were. That's the opening sequence to 2001: A Space Odyssey. And that's what I thought space stations were growing up as a kid, watching The Wonderful World at Disney. I thought they'd all be these orbiting things with artificial gravity and so on. And that was back in 1968 that this movie was made. And it's taken us a long time to get to where we actually had a huge space station in space. And now to actually think that we're going to have commercial space stations. So Axiom Space, they kind of got a head start on the others. They've actually flown private astronaut missions to the International Space Station. I'll talk more about that. But their plan is to launch in 2026 a module that they're building right now, and actually they worked on an agreement with NASA to attach it to the International Space Station and operate it as their zone on the International Space Station until, that would be 4 years, until they have their other modules ready, and then they'll remove it and attach it to their other modules and have this commercial module up there. And Axiom Space is partnered with Thales Alenia in Italy, building the modules. Blue Origin, the orbital reef. This is a partnership between Blue Origin, Boeing, Sierra Space, and Redwire. And they're all working together to create the orbital reef. And then finally, the other one that we're working in commercial LEO destinations. Now, you can read in the paper, there's another company that just came out about expandable modules that they want to launch in 2026. But these three that I'm talking about now are the ones that have agreements with NASA under commercial LEO destinations. And the third one is Starlab. And this is a partnership between Voyager Space and Airbus. I mentioned private astronaut missions. This is the first private astronaut mission. They've actually flown 3 of them. That's a pretty big crew on the International Space Station. The guy on the right is Mike Lopez Alegria. Mike was a former NASA astronaut, Naval Academy graduate that did other things, went to work for Axiom, and was the commander of 2 missions, PAM-1 and PAM-2. And Peggy Whitson was the commander for the PAM-1 and PAM-3. Peggy Whitson was the commander for the PAM-2 mission. And they provide knowledge, help train the crew, and ensure that they operate safely on the International Space Station. So another first. They're already starting commercialization. What's the whole purpose of all this? It's a stepping stone to the future. Learning how to operate in space, learning all the things we know, developing the systems, because eventually we want to go back to the moon. We want to build Gateway, and we want to eventually go on to Mars. So the space station, it's been 24 years, almost now, of a permanent crew on board. It's been up there since 1998. It's getting towards its end, and we're moving toward that commercialization so we can focus on going forward. You heard about the Artemis II crew, an amazing crew. Can't wait to see those guys launch. I know them all, and they're just really great people. And I have to end with this one. I got to see the first pictures from James Webb, and they absolutely blew me away. I was at the Space Telescope Institute at APL in Baltimore. And it truly is amazing. All you guys are familiar with the Pillars of Creation. That's Hubble on the left and James Webb on the right. I mean, this telescope looks back, the universe is 13.8 billion years old, and Webb can look back just 350 million years from the Big Bang. It's amazing what we're going to learn, what we've already learned. Earth-like planets, all kinds of new things coming in discovery. And I just think that, look at all those stars and galaxies that are out there. I got to ask, and we haven't found out for sure yet, but one of the questions is, are we alone in this universe? And I always get asked, did you see any aliens? I never saw any. I looked, but I never saw any. But think about it. In an infinite universe, with not just billions of stars, but billions of galaxies, how can there not be another Earth-like planet out there that intelligent life has developed on? They're just so far away. Or maybe they have been here and we don't know it. But amen. So it's all about discovery. It's about learning. It's about going beyond what our limits are. Back to the moon, on to Mars, and beyond. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that you're enjoying the conference. I was really impressed when I walked around down on the floor. I've never seen so many telescopes in one place in my life. But more importantly, thank you for your passion about our space program and exploration. And I hope that you share my story with your kids and your grandkids about persistence and finding out what they enjoy doing, and then work hard and don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bob. Thank you. Thank you very much.